Good morning. This is Courtney Cleftis, host of the Goddess Foundation podcast and founder of the Goddess Foundation. I am here today with an unplanned video slash podcast episode, just to help us all, women and any human with a uterus, to process the catastrophic overturning of Roe v. Wade last week. I have been personally struggling quite a bit just to fully grasp how catastrophic this is for women's rights, but really for human rights. The right for any human, but especially female-bodied people, to have control and autonomy and sovereignty over their own bodies, which is a fundamental human right as far as I'm concerned. So what I will be doing today in this episode, I will be walking through the figure of Lilith, a Hebrew demoness, or a demonized pre-patriarchal goddess figure, and how she relates to women's sovereignty, and perhaps to this battle over abortion and women's rights to choose. And through that, we will go into how you can work with Lilith or other goddess figures to help process this. I was going to say come to terms, but I refuse to come to terms with this. This is a reality that is not something that we should reconcile ourselves to. We need to, like Lilith, push back against the patriarchal tyranny that is oppressing women and other marginalized humans in the US, but also globally. So how to work with Lilith, how Lilith can help you fight back, and then more practically speaking, just some resources for anyone who wishes to take a stand against this catastrophic Supreme Court decision. All right, so we'll just start with Lilith. Who is she? Oh, actually, well, here is, I have this open. I have many different tabs open, which I will be looking at throughout this video. But I decided to start with this Lilith Feminist Journal, an online feminist journal magazine. Independent, Jewish, and frankly feminist. I believe it started in 1976. And when you go to their main page, one of the first things that you see is a feature. This year, we will fight for abortion. So women within Jewish communities in the US evidently have also chosen to work with the figure of Lilith, the namesake of this magazine, to be sort of the general in the battleground against the heteropatriarchy. All right, so who exactly is Lilith? So I'm going to start with a book that I recently reread, just a day after this catastrophic overturning of Roe v. Wade. I felt compelled to reread this book. It's an old one by a Jungian analyst, I believe, named Barbara Black-Koltov. The book is called The Book of Lilith, and it is quite old. It was originally published in 1986. All right, so this is just from the introduction, and this is how she describes Lilith. Not necessarily promoting the negative descriptions of her, but just giving you a glimpse into how this figure has been demonized throughout the millennia within heteropatriarchal societies. All right. Lilith, an irresistible, long-haired she-demon of the night, flies through Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Canaanite, Persian, Hebrew, Arabic, and Teutonic mythology. During the 3rd millennium BCE in Sumer, she was at first Lil, a destructive storm or wind spirit. Among the Semites of Mesopotamia, she was Lilith, who later, confabulated with Leil, the Hebrew word for night, became Lilith, a night demon who lays hold of men and women who sleep alone, causing erotic dreams and nocturnal orgasms. By the 8th century BCE in Syria, Lilith, the succubus, was joined to what had originally been a quite distinct demonic figure of the child-killing witch, Lamashtu. In this form, Lilith, Winged One and Strangleress, became known throughout the world by the appellations Dame Donkey Legs, Vixen Bogey, Bloodsucker, so she's associated with vampires. And I believe, I'm interjecting, I believe she's actually known as not only the mother of all demons, but the first vampire. And I think they depict her as that in the TV show True Blood, but that's an aside. Anyway, back to this quote. So we have these interesting appellations of Lilith as Dame Donkey Legs, Vixen Bogey, Bloodsucker, Woman of Harlotry, Alien Woman, Impure Female, End of All Flesh, End of Day, Bruja, Frega, Witch, Hag, Snatcher, and Enchantress. She was called Serpent, Dog, Donkey and Owl, Screeching Nightjar or Strix, and the soul of every living creature that creepeth, especially snakes, like the serpent in the Garden of Eden. She was Adam's first wife, the female of Leviathan, the wife of Samael the devil and King Ashmodai, the queen of Sheba and Zamargad, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, and is even the consort of God himself, while the Shekinah, his bride, the bride of God, Yahweh, is in exile. Attempts to suppress and deny her date from the 6th century BCE, but she returns evermore as a seductress and child killer, and will continue to do so until the Messiah comes and drives the unclean spirits from the land. And this is a biblical reference, I believe, Zechariah 13:2. This book, a psychological anthology, is an attempt to tell her story, to evoke her presence in consciousness, and to inquire into her meaning in the modern psyche, and to rehabilitate her through the lens of through a non-patriarchal lens. So I'm just skimming through. She essentially refuses to submit to Adam and the jealous patriarchal male god, and she leaves the false paradise of Eden, essentially, which she views as a prison, and chooses exile in the wilderness and her autonomy, freedom of choice over being subservient to Adam or the male god figure. So Lilith is one badass, fierce warrior woman goddess. So I wanted to talk briefly about this notion of Lilith as a child killer, because she could arguably be demonized as sort of a demon of abortion or miscarriage. But this book has a really interesting and provocative reframing of what Lilith's role as a child killer really means. Let me see if I can track down the page. Pages 85 to 87 of this book. All right, and I will quote and then just briefly comment. And you're on page 85. One sees clinging behavior in women who have strong infantile needs for love and approval from a man or the father, the Father God. Lilith, the child killer, strangles these infantile needs. And then moving to the next page, page 86. Here, a daughter of Eve, under attack by her infantile clinging to the patriarchal angel in the house ideals, finds salvation in Lilith's child-killing rage. End quote. So essentially, Lilith is killing the infantilized stereotype of fragile, delicate, subservient women and empowering women to mature into their own agency and authority and autonomy, being self-sufficient, autonomous women who do not rely on men or the patriarchy, male figures of authority, for validation. So I thought that was a really provocative way to reframe the concept of Lilith as a child killer in much more positive terms, viewing Lilith as a sort of feminist icon, which evidently the Jewish, or a subset of the Jewish community, has done in the US by founding the Lilith Journal in 1976. So how can we bring this back around to this crisis with Roe v. Wade? Since I am a witch, I am going to be invoking or citing another witch. This is the Glam Witch. And I have not met him personally, and I'm if I'm misgendering him, I apologize. Let's just go with them to be safe. I do not know their pronouns, but this witch works, as far as I can tell, pretty, maybe even exclusively with Lilith. And this article is actually a couple years old, a call to Lilith, activism through the dark goddess. And I'm just going to read a few quotes here because this rings true today, especially now with what's just happened. So Michael Herkes, and again, Michael, if for some reason you're listening and I'm mispronouncing your name, I do sincerely apologize. But I do want to attribute you. All right, so we need Lilith. For those who may be unfamiliar with Lilith, she is an ancient spirit who has had a long and maligned reputation for at least 5,000 years, roughly the age of the patriarchy. Her most popular myth comes from the Hebrew tradition as Adam's first wife, created from the earth just as he was. Adam demanded that Lilith submit to him. Instead, she saw them as equals and would not allow herself to succumb to Adam's sexism. As a result, she was said to have sprouted wings and voluntarily exiled Eden for a free life as a demonic outcast. Well before this story was created, Lilith was seen as a lascivious succubus and child killer. Again, with the child killer. A slanderous representation of her past role as handmaiden to the great goddess Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of sexuality, love, and war. In modern times, Lilith has become a feminist icon and one that frankly can no longer be ignored. In the past week, so as of May 2019, abortion laws have been under attack in the United States, with the increasing number of states passing heartbeat bills. These bills plan to ban abortion up to 6 weeks of pregnancy, a time in which most women do not even know they are pregnant. Meanwhile, Alabama has opted for a more extreme, near total ban on abortion. In both capacities, any woman found guilty of having an abortion, and those doctors who assist, will face felony charges and up to 99 years in prison. The only caveat is when the mother's life is at risk, but does not include cases of rape or incest. Never mind the guns killing every day. Never mind those who do not vaccinate their children. Never mind the abandoned children who get pushed through the system. The hypocrisy is outrageous. And who is behind the bills? Men. Men and complacent women who voluntarily allow our patriarchal political system to shackle them and throw away the key. The attack on women, is deplorable. And like Herkes, I too am 100% pro-choice. A woman should have the right to decide what to do with her body, period. Absolutely no one or nothing or thing should ever have the right to be able to dictate what another human can do with their body, regardless of the person's gender. And I realize I am adding my own commentary. To have the audacity of even suggesting that having or aiding an abortion have a harsher punishment than a rapist who causes it is even more maddening. It is an act against women and humans as a whole. A convenient result to having abortion as a felony means that those convicted women would not be allowed to vote. Meanwhile, laws like this change the narrative and present the idea of rape and incest as something that is okay. Women do not get pregnant on their own, and they are not factories for men to use and abuse. Thank you for saying that, Michael. We need our allies. In these troubling times, Lilith is needed more than ever, especially now in the wake of what just happened, what just transpired in the Supreme Court. Lilith is the champion of the oppressed and is above all a goddess of human rights, a goddess representative of equality, identity, personal empowerment, and survival in the wilderness, where she takes off after abandoning Eden. Some even consider her the patroness of abortion and contraceptives, making her even more relevant now. This comes from her child killer folklore, which was likely linked to her embodiment of sex for pleasure over procreation. Nevertheless, Lilith teaches us to stand up to the bigots. She gives us the power and the strength necessary to overcome obstacles. Now is the time that we must embrace the dark goddess and rebel in her honor. So I just wanted to thank you very much, Michael Lamb Witch Extraordinaire, for writing this. It rings true, especially now, and we need all feet on the ground to push back against this really atrocity against human rights, an attack on human rights, especially women's rights, but human rights writ large. So all of this Lilith preamble aside, how can you invoke and channel Lilith and actually take concrete action? So here are a few links that I found, just some organizations that you can support if you feel compelled, like I do, to find some tangible way of taking action. So I'm going to start with a Texan organization, which I found while just doing some online research about Lilith and abortion. And one of the first things that popped up, if I can find the screen, I have so many tabs open. Here it is, the Lilith Fund. It's an organization in Texas, which has for a very long time, as a red state, been a battleground for women's abortion rights. The Lilith Fund was established in order to provide resources, much needed resources for women, especially marginalized women, often women of color, perhaps trans women of color, essentially making abortions accessible to the most vulnerable of the population. And this is what hurts me the most right now. I happen to live in a state where abortion is still legal, Minnesota. My wife and I are not at risk, really, of being impregnated. God forbid we're raped or assaulted. But in general, abortion is not something either of us personally have to worry about. But I know it is something that many women do need to worry about. And especially women who live in red states where Roe v. Wade was one of the only things enabling them to have any access to an abortion legally. It's just really devastating. So I applaud the Lilith Fund for coming into existence in the first place to promote women's rights and invoking once again the figure of Lilith as a sort of matron saint of powerful, independent, fierce women. So this is a statement from the founder, the executive director of the Lilith Fund in the wake of last week's reversal of Roe v. Wade. This is her statement. So this woman, Amanda Beatrice Williams, states, "We can't overstate how devastating this ruling is to the communities we serve. Abortion funds have been sounding the alarm about this happening for years, but knowing it was coming does not diminish the deep harm this will cause, especially among low-income people of color living in the South." I'm sorry. This is just really infuriating. I'm gonna pull myself together and keep going. While we are heartbroken by this news, we, the Lilith Fund, will not close our hotline, which will remain open to provide information to Texans. Today we are grieving, but tomorrow we will continue our fight, and while we are forced to comply with the law, abortion funds are experts in building power in our communities, and we aren't going to stop showing up for pregnant Texas. Fuck the patriarchy. That is all I have to say right now. Thank you, Ms. Ms. Williams, for stating this, and I am just really horrified that we are all in this position right now, and that organizations like the Lilith Fund um, are forced to stop providing abortions um, due to the legal risk that they would face. But evidently, they are still working to support women in any way, shape, and form they can. So if you live in Texas, I would recommend going to their website, lilithfund.org. I was reading the blog, you don't need to put in the blog part, and just see what you can do, especially now in these days of crisis, to see how you can support them and support the individuals who live in Texas who are really, really suffering as a result of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So what else can you do if you live outside of Texas? Here we go. So Planned Parenthood, obviously. There are, just go to this link, plannedparenthoodaction.org/rightfully ours/bans off our bodies. I will provide these links in the show notes, so I'm not going to spell it out. I mean, you can read it off of the screen since I'm doing screen share, but I will also provide links. So as always, Planned Parenthood needs more volunteers. I personally have not volunteered in the past, but perhaps now is the time for me to actually do so, and not just providing financial support. Not to diminish that, the importance of that. My wife and I have already donated to numerous organizations, including Planned Parenthood, but that alone to me, at this point in time, does not feel sufficient. Just looking to see if there are any other links I wanted to. Is this a different link? Yes, this is a blog on plannedparenthood.org, dated June 27th, 2022. Coincidentally enough, my wife's birthday. He was like, "Happy birthday, Carmen. Have Roe v. Wade overturned." Anyway, so they provide numerous links. Donate to an abortion fund. Again, like I said, support your local Planned Parenthood, financially or otherwise. Help independent clinics. Speak up, share your story. And so I'm going to share my story now. I don't actually have a personal story about abortion. I have not had an abortion. I have never been pregnant. I do not intend to be pregnant. However, I learned after my mom died in 2012, my father and I were, I think it was at my sister's graduation, and we were out to dinner. My sister was celebrating with the rest of her class, her graduating class. And my dad was telling me about just stories about my mom. And I learned things about her that I hadn't known while she was still alive. And one of the things I learned was that about a year prior to my birth, or I guess when I was conceived, probably, we're doing the math right, she had had a miscarriage and was really, really devastated. And I did learn about this later. I stumbled across some of her journals, her diaries dating back to the mid to late 80s through when I was born, and then my younger sister. That in and of itself was just really a gift to be able to read my mom's own story. And she did talk about her miscarriage. But what I learned beyond that, my dad mentioned that I think when she was 19 or 20, around the time they got married, or shortly before she got pregnant with his child, and the two of them decided that it was best for her to have an abortion, and she largely thanks to Roe v. Wade, my mom had an abortion, and I never had a chance to talk to her about this, to hear her story, but I think it's really important to just illustrate how common abortions really are, and how necessary they are. Women don't do this to murder children. This is not murder. This is women having the right to decide when, how, and where they will have children, because ultimately it is up to us. And this is really, really crucial because nearly 1 in 4 women in the US will have an abortion by the time they're 45 years old. but people don't talk about it. And I just illustrated this point. I didn't know for 25 years that my mom had ever had an abortion until she had died, and I later learned through my dad. Just a tiny little fragment of her story. I highly recommend other people like me, or women who've had abortions or know other women, friends, family members who've had an abortion. Do speak up. It's really important that we push back against the silence and the stigma. So here are just more resources. Abortion rights. Planned Parenthood is definitely a great place to start. There are others, but I just wanted to start with this, and then specifically the Lilith Fund in Texas, primarily because I stumbled upon it looking for information about Lilith and abortion. So, like Lilith, we will not stand by and be silent and be oppressed by the patriarchy. We will fight to dismantle the patriarchy. So one last thought, as an amateur astrologer, I am really intrigued. There's an astrological abstract point in space called the Black Moon or Dark Moon Lilith. It's not a planet. It's not one of the luminaries, the sun or the moon. It's not any of the planets in our solar system that have astrological significance. But here, let me just pull up the link. So I'm just going to read over this because this article was explained better than I can. Again, I am not really equipped. I'm not trained as an astrologer, so I can't really explain it very well. But here's just a brief overview from an article on mindbodygreen.com. What is the Black Moon Lilith in astrology? The Black Moon Lilith, also sometimes called the Dark Moon, is the point along the moon's orbit when it's farthest from the Earth. As the Astro Twins explain, and I'll provide a link to their website, they're kind of like top astrologers. Unlike the planets and asteroids in your birth chart, Lilith isn't actually a material thing. Like I said, it's an abstract point in space. They talk about the origin story. I'm just going to scroll down here because I've already talked you through who Lilith is in the contemporary imagination. So if you were to look up your chart, which you could do, I'll provide some resources. You can find out where the Black Moon Lilith resides in your chart. In my case, she is in the sign of Leo, directly like a degree away from an exact conjunction. So basically at the same place in space in the zodiac as my midheaven, which is associated with vocation and career and public persona. So it somehow seems fitting that I am publicly invoking Lilith on this podcast. But anyway, enough about me and my own Lilith placement. But you might be curious to find out where she resides in your chart, so you can find better a way to integrate and work with her in a very unique and individualized way. So according to this article, they say, what does your Lilith placement mean? The Astro Twins like to call her your inner bitch. And that is an acronym for being in total control of herself. I love it. She's connected to your inner shadow self, so the part of you in Jungian terms that you repress, but also the areas where you put your foot down, set boundaries, and express anger, and I would say righteous anger. She can reveal your unique sensual nature and seductive powers, as well as other parts of yourself you may not always be willing to express. So essentially, it's the shadow, which can hold a lot of wisdom and power if you are willing to face the darkest, murkiest depths of yourself. There's often a gem down there. And it's often connected with sexuality, especially because it's so incredibly taboo in our patriarchal culture. So I brought up Black Moon Lilith. I have a point to this. Right around the time that Roe v. Wade was overturned, we were approaching a new moon in Cancer, the sign of Cancer, which is the sun sign of the United States. And in any case, the new moon is when the moon is in the same exact sign and place as the sun, so you can't see it because the sun outshines it. So both the sun and the moon on June 28th were in Cancer. I don't remember the exact degree, but Black Moon Lilith was also at the exact same spot. So Lilith is at a really prominent place in our collective psyche at the moment, which makes sense considering what just transpired on the collective scale. Um, so an astrologer, the Oxford astrologer, and I'll provide a link to this. I'm going to play just a brief segment of her video discussing Lilith and Cancer, the sign of the dark mother, because I think it, once again, very much speaks to what we are facing as a collective right now, and how it's important, if you feel so inclined, to maybe work with Lilith as a goddess, as an archetype, as a facet of yourself, however you wish to view her. So she writes, the Black Moon Lilith will be making her way through the sign of motherhood, Cancer, until January of 2023. So what I learned from this video, which I found really interesting, was that the Black Moon Lilith spends 9 months in each of the 12 zodiacal signs. So like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, etc. And right now she is in the sign of Cancer, which she moved into, I believe, fairly recently. I think she said in April of this year, and she will spend 9 months there, which I find really interesting because 9 months is a human gestation period. So just linking Lilith once again with having children, or the choice not to, perhaps. So we're just going to listen to a brief segment of this video that the Oxford astrologer has on her YouTube channel. Again, I will provide links, and then we will wrap up this kind of rambly podcast.
Notional point, this point, Black Moon Lilith in Cancer for such a long time. Well, the first thing that happened when she went in, which was the 14th of April that she went in, and she was leaving Cancer on the 8th of January. So that's how long she's there. And you will be able to see that she goes through regularly. So if you have any planets in Cancer or Capricorn, she's going to be making interesting aspects, or they will be making interesting aspects to this point. What happened was we had the controversy, well, not controversy, the attempt to slay Roe versus Wade, which is the right to a woman's right to abortion in the United States. And I would say that if there's a goddess of abortion, it's Lilith. And she's come into this place of motherhood. And of course, for the United States, is a Cancerian country. It's born on the 4th of July, right? Which is mid-Cancer. So she will be getting there. She's not there yet, but Lilith is coming to the United States sun. Currently, I'm speaking now at the beginning in mid-May, just after the Scorpio eclipse, which also had something to do with Roe versus Wade, I think. But she, so currently she's at 3 degrees. She's actually making a conjunction to Ceres, which is another asteroid that we associate with nurturing, nourishing motherhood. Although, again, Ceres is fiercer. Ceres is about protecting your grown-up daughters, okay? So we've got Lilith and Ceres are now working together. So it's interesting that I think for many, many women, one of the reasons that we want abortion rights, that we want to protect those, is in order to protect our daughters.
All right, and we're going to leave it at there. So my apologies to anyone who is not fluent in the language of astrology. She was essentially pointing out that as Lilith moved into the sign of Cancer, she was also side by side with the asteroid Ceres, or I believe that's the Latin term for the ancient Greek goddess Demeter, or Demeter, the mother of Persephone, who was a rape victim of Hades and dragged down into the underworld, where she eventually became the Queen of Hell, which I believe is the title that is also associated with Lilith, at the very least, in the contemporary sort of remake of Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix. Anyway, if you want to see a very fascinating portrayal of Lilith, check out that TV show. Again, I'll drop a link in the box. But I thought it was really interesting that Lilith was also teaming up with Ceres, or Demeter, protecting women, women's bodies, women's rights, and women's rights over what? Side of Cancer, over motherhood, the choice to be a mother or not be a mother, or just not to be a mother right now. We have the right to decide when, where, how, and why we are going to have children or bring children into this pretty fucked up world, pardon my French. So anyway, this is all I have for today. Oh, I don't have the card with me right now, but I did want to. This is just a quote from the goddess, the Divine Feminine Oracle that I referenced in my last video. And I haven't pulled a card of the week, but I've decided to work with Lilith. And I just wanted to show you or tell you the soul voice meditation and intention that Meggan Watterson and Lilsbeth Cheever-Gessamen, artist, have associated with Lilith in this oracle deck. So Lilith, also known as the first woman, and here's the soul voice meditation. I am the voice of my body and soul. I choose the life that I desire to live. So Lilith, if you view her as the goddess of abortion, as the Oxford astrologer has chosen to do, she is the epitome of pro-choice. So work with Lilith in yourself as a collective and find some way of pushing back if you feel inspired to do so. Invoke Lilith, rage with Lilith. She will support you in pushing back against the patriarchy and hopefully eventually toppling it once and for all. That's all I have for today. I just wanted to just say that I support women's rights as a woman myself, as a cis woman, and I am horrified by what has happened, but I will not back down. Like Lilith, we are going to stand up and we are going to fight back. Thanks for viewing, listening. This was an unplanned episode, just provoked by this really horrifying, catastrophic event. But I will be back hopefully soon with another episode, depending on my time and availability. Like I said, I do work full time, and I am currently in library school working towards my library degree. So I do have limited time and energy to devote to this, but I found it really, really important to put my voice out there, to reclaim my voice with Lilith behind my back the whole way. And just as I know she is behind yours. Much love and gratitude to all my listeners and to all of the women and just humans of any gender out there fighting the good fight. Much love to you all.